Yes.
Would you describe in your own words exactly what a peace signal is? Or a peace feeler? And also comment on the validity of Newsweek's article as referring to you as having brought back a peace signal in your recent trip there.
I have to go to the other room. Well, I don't know. I don't know what the difference between a peace feel and a peace signal is, to tell you the truth.
Senator, if you don't mind an interruption. Just that you mentioned that peace feeler was too strong of a word in connection with whatever you did bring back.
No. No, I did. Tell you the truth, I never got into it at all. They asked me if I brought back. I don't know what they asked me. They asked me if I brought back a peace feeler or a peace feeler. I think they asked me if I brought back a peace feeler, and I said no. And if they had asked me if I brought back a peace signal, I think I probably would have said no too. I was asked that feeling. I was asked that question at the White House after I visited with President Johnson, as to whether I thought that I'd brought back one of those things. Let me say, I had some interesting conversations, and I relayed them all to the President of the United States.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes?
I was wondering, would you accept...
No. Oh. I thought you were going to give me the nomination for something. I would think that that there is a commitment similar to the one that we developed in Vietnam, similar to the one that we have in Vietnam, developing in Thailand. I would think that particularly in dealing with the problems of northeast Thailand, that is developing, and the fact that we have, I believe, approximately 35,000 men in Thailand at the present time. I would think that we were moving in that direction. I have very grave reservations about it. I wouldn't think we're certainly not at the same stage that we are in Vietnam at the present time. I would think that probably we're back like we were 5 or 6 years ago. But I would think that we're certainly moving in that direction. And I have grave reservations that we should move in that direction. I think that we've known about the problems of northeast Thailand. We've known about the difficulty that exists in northeast Thailand, and the fact that northeast Thailand has had in the past very little relationship with the capital city, and that there is a good deal of opposition in that part of the country to the central government. There has been ample opportunity for the central government to put in reforms. I think that there are some changes that are taking place that are for the better, but I question whether they are rapid enough. But in any case, I think that's a problem that should be handled by the people of Thailand and not by the soldiers of the United States. Can I go over here? Go ahead.
Since, as you say, you brought back no Hanoi peace signal,
I wish I hadn't. No.
did you bring back instead a feeling about how Hanoi would react to stop the bombing?
I have some feelings about it. I think they'd be pleased.
Senator, the present administration has repeatedly argued in partial justification of its policy in Vietnam that this policy is no more than a continuation of that of previous administration, do you consider this argument valid?
Well, I would say that if you're going to, if you're going back to previous administrations for a responsibility of why we're in the situation that we are, or why we're in Vietnam, certainly previous administrations, including the administration which I would played a role, President Kennedy's administration, have to take their responsibility. Now, I don't know that wouldn't be able to say that President Eisenhower would have followed the same course that President Kennedy followed, nor would be able to say that President Kennedy would or would not have followed the same policy that's been followed over the period of the last 3 years. I think that's conjecture, but if you're, and I think anybody who tries to determine, as some have, as to what a previous president would or would not do is making a bad mistake. But I think that if anybody was going to say that if they find fault with the present situation in Vietnam and say that this is just the responsibility of President Johnson, I think it would be very, very unfair. He inherited a situation which was very difficult, very complex, and where the problems were immense, and he's, in my judgment, tried to deal with it with courage and with determination. And I think he makes an effort to... I think he wants to find a peaceful solution to the problems of Vietnam. I happen to have some disagreements in connection with some of those matters, but I recognize the fact that he's making a conscientious effort and has a great deal of knowledge and is dedicated to trying to find an answer to that problem.
Senator, you talked about the other great nations of Asia. What do you feel the United States can do to encourage them to deal with their own domestic problems and to take upon themselves more responsibility in facing up to the challenge of communist China?
Well, obviously, what is going to be required, I suppose the most important one really is India. And there are obviously internal changes and improvements that have to be made by the Indian government itself. We've had numerous conversations and discussions with them. I don't think that you really can hold them up to blackmail and say that we're not going to assist you unless you follow the course, just the course that is wished and wanted by the United States. But on the other hand, I think that we can point out that unless certain reforms are undertaken, then it's not going to make a great deal of difference how much aid or assistance the United States gives. I think our aid or assistance has to be of sufficient magnitude so that they really can get their head above water. And when we give, as we are now, $600 million of economic aid to Vietnam and just a small portion of that to India, which has a population of 400 million, and with the population increasing as it is, they have a very difficult time even getting started. So I think that we have to do more from an economic point of view so that they at least can see their course a little bit more clearly than they do at the present time. I think that we also have to take whatever steps we can to make sure that the countries of Western Europe meet their responsibility, and Japan, the developed countries of the world, help the undeveloped countries of the world. I don't think any of us have done enough. I think here in the United States, where our assistance to the undeveloped world, based on our gross national product and based on our population, has been going steadily down over the period of the last 10 years, I think is a bad mistake and very short-sighted, as I tried to point out in my prepared statement. I think, however, the other countries of Western Europe, which have prospered so tremendously, at least partially because of the aid and assistance that we have given to them, initially should also help to meet the demands that are required in the undeveloped part of the world. I think that, let me say that President Kennedy once said that if we don't help the many who are poor, there won't be anything left of the few that are rich. And I think that that's absolutely true. I think that we can go along, we can make all the kind of progress that we want in the United States and in Western Europe. But as the gap between the poor nations and the rich nations grows larger and larger, there's going to be greater and greater bitterness and disillusion meant throughout the world. And I think that's going to be an unsatisfactory world to hand on to the next generation of Americans. So it seems to me that we're prepared to take military action. We're prepared to spend $2.5 billion a month to dispose of people in Vietnam, and something like $400,000 for every person that we kill, I think that we should also be prepared to help other countries when we're as affluent as we are. We can spend $3 billion a year in the United States on dogs, then I think that we can spend a portion of that on foreign aid. You know, we spend $600 million just on licensing dogs each year in the United States. We spend $100 million on comic books. I thought it was a large proportion which come people who read comic books. Could we put that light a little lower?
Over here, Senator.
All right.
Do you feel that Hanoi is acting as a tool of China in its expanding the South Vietnam as an independent regime, and if it wins, will be independent of China?
Well, first, I think it's Hanoi as a relationship with China, but I think that the history of the Vietnamese and history of North Vietnamese as a people is very antagonistic toward China. It's always been traditionally a bitter enemy of China. I think the fact that it has a communist government and China has a communist government and that they are neighbors, that they have been thrown together to some extent. I don't think that they are completely independent of China by any means, but I don't believe that the North Vietnamese want the control or domination of the Chinese in their country or would permit it in South Vietnam if they took over South Vietnam.
Senator, would you comment on the efficacy of the Lower Mekong Basin project to stabilize and influence the need for reconciliation and economic development in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think that makes a good deal of sense. The person who, of course, was the strongest supporter of it always, and I think pushed it more and reserves most credit for evolving the idea, within at least the United States government, was Chester Bowles. I think he used to talk about it continuously as a project that he thought was well worthwhile. I think that it is. It makes a good deal of sense, as I think the Asian Development Bank has a good deal of promise in trying to deal with some of those problems. Again, I think that thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
The present administration of Vietnam, you said you had some reservations.
What did you say? No, the question was that I said that I had some reservations about with the administration in connection with Vietnam. I am not in favor of pulling out of South Vietnam. I mean, if the effort there is going to be successful rather than a military victory, if the effort is going to be successful there, that it's going to have to be through the pacification program and the political program, the economic program, rather than through any military action that we take. And my judgment is that the struggle within Vietnam is going to go on for some considerable period of time if we rely purely on military means. I think that the talent and energy and effort that we've made has been more obvious in the military field than it has been in the political economic field, which I think has suffered thereby. I'm in favor of and I believe the administration also is in favor of a civilian government within Vietnam. I would like to see a civilian government. I'd like to see support for the assembly that has been elected. I would hope that they would be able to take over, and the civilian would be able to take over who responds to the will of the people of South Vietnam. I would also, as I have said before again, I would be in favor of the National Liberation Front being represented directly at any peace talks that we might have in connection with trying to find a peaceful solution to the problem of Vietnam. Those are some of the areas in which there's some shades of differences.
Senator, I wonder if you're willing to try another room. We have
All
a
right,
few
well, maybe I'll
dozen
take a couple,
Right.
2 more, and then I'll go. But you're a poor sport, so go ahead.
The more conservative elements in this country would not accept let's say, a compromise solution in Vietnam. That means that they would have, that the government would have to be like it is now, and the revolution would have to be completely suppressed, etc. I'm asking you if you would be in favor of a coalition government, including communists and the National Liberation Front, if that, in fact, indeed is the will of the South Vietnamese people in an election. And that seems to me an important point in a compromise solution.
Yeah, well, first, the answer to the question is yes, I would if that was the will of the people in Vietnam. But I think it's much more complicated than that, if I may suggest. Because when you're talking about what the will of the people is going to be in Vietnam and through elections, you come back to who's going to count the ballots. If you're going to have an election, you're going to have a... I thought there was some question about him in the last election. So I think if I may continue, please. I think that it's a question during that interim period of time as to what kind of a government that you're going to have and what's going to happen in Vietnam between the time that perhaps you have some negotiations and discussions and you ultimately reach a decision that you're going to have an election. Then you're going to have a government perhaps that's going to run the country. It's a question of who's going to be represented in that government. I made a speech a year ago this month in which I said that I thought first that if we had, which I suppose is another area in which there's some question of whether the administration and whether I agree completely with the administration, but I said that I thought that we had to recognize the fact that what we were trying to achieve in Vietnam was not a total military victory. That General Taylor testified before the Foreign Relations Committee and had said that what we were looking for was not a discussion similar to the one we had on the battleship Missouri, that there was something less than that, that if we were going into discussions and negotiations, that meant that we had to give something, as well as the fact that they had to give something, that we couldn't expect the negotiations or discussions that took place to be just there coming into a table and saying, we hand this over to you. First, we have to recognize that they controlled, our adversaries controlled a large percentage of the population and large percentage of the land and large percentage of the area of South Vietnam even at the present time. And they were not going to rapidly surrender that. So if they came in and had discussions that we were going to have to be prepared to give something up, I said that I thought that we would have to be prepared to give them a share in the power and the responsibility within South Vietnam. Now, what that would mean, I think, is more complex, because I would hope that during the interim period of time until the election, and it seems to me that this is an area that's well worthwhile discussing and considering, in which we haven't really had any wide debate within the United States. During that interim period of time, you would hope that you'd have some international control, perhaps, over whatever happens within Vietnam. That wouldn't be just the United States, and perhaps it wouldn't be just China, and wouldn't be North Vietnam, but that perhaps you could bring in some international group that during that interim period of time would have control over the country and would have certain responsibilities in the country. But during that period of time, you couldn't, if the National Liberation Front, which is the political arm of the Viet Cong, if they were going to campaign, they would not campaign, and they would not be active throughout the country if the present government, with its attitude, was in power and in authority. So that you would have to make some arrangement whereby the National Liberation Front played some role during that period of time. What that role would be, I think you'd have to work out at the time of negotiations. You would hope that a civilian group that operated out of Saigon, working with the National Liberation Front, perhaps with Hanoi, could work out something that was satisfactory, perhaps guaranteed by an international group. But in the last analysis, in the election, I think that the United States policy has to be that we would abide by whatever elections that might be. I think we might also recognize that it wouldn't have to be that a winner would take all, and you could have a different kind of a constitution, where it wouldn't necessarily mean that either the National Liberation Front got the whole control of South Vietnam or none of it, but you might have some kind of an arrangement that would be made under a different kind of a constitution. But I think all of those are very complex and difficult problems. Let me just say this. It's one of the reasons that I've stressed the idea that I think that we should keep in mind that negotiations or discussions are not the end. It's just a means to an end. And I don't think that we should all say that if we arrive at the period of negotiations, our problem has disappeared in Vietnam. There's a good deal of talk now about whether we're going to get to negotiations or not. Well, it's very possible we'll get to negotiations and arrive at no agreement. It's a question where the negotiations are going to lead to, which seems to me is the critical and crucial matter. Not on the question. The question really isn't whether we can sit down and talk to them. I agree that that's an important and vital step. But even beyond that, the most important step, in my judgment, the most critical and crucial one, and the one that deserves all our attention, is what kind of an agreement we can reach. Where are we going to be? And that really comes down to what you're discussing here. What do we want in Vietnam, or what the gentleman over here asked me, what the relationship with North Vietnam is to China? What's the relationship of South Vietnam to China? What's going to be the relationship of North Vietnam to South Vietnam? What do we consider in our national interest should be that relationship? What is going to be the relationship of South Vietnam to Thailand? What do we consider in our national interest that relationship be? What kind of a control if any, is China going to be permitted to have, and what other countries are going to be represented in that part of the world? How active is the National Liberation Front going to be permitted to be as a political group within South Vietnam? How long before, if at any time, you're going to permit South Vietnam and North Vietnam to unite? And under what